Welcome to AI Frontier, AI. Today, we are not talking about tools, models, or productivity tricks. We are going after a belief so basic that most institutions never question it.
Belief that if you add smart people, the system should get smarter.
And the growing evidence that in many systems the opposite is happening.
Think about what organizations do when things start to slow down. Decisions take longer. Execution drags. Coordination feels heavier than it used to. The instinctive response is always the same. Hire more people, more specialists, more managers, more layers to handle the complexity.
And for most of modern history, that instinct was rational. Intelligence was scarce. Information moved slowly. Coordination required physical presence. If you wanted more output, you needed more people in the system. Factories scaled by adding workers. Governments scaled by adding clerks. Corporations scaled by adding specialists and managers. Headcount was not just a choice, it was the infrastructure of intelligence.
And the problems themselves were simpler. Narrower scopes, slower feedback loops. You could afford layers without the system choking on itself.
But that model had a hidden dependency. The environment had to be slow enough that coordination did not dominate.
Because every new person does not just add intelligence. Every new person also adds interfaces, communication paths, alignment costs, context transfer.
And alignment is not free.
As systems grow, coordination does not increase linearly, it accelerates. The effort required just to stay aligned can grow faster than the value created by adding the next capable human.
Growth turns inward. The system starts spending more energy thinking about itself than acting on the world.
You see this as decision latency, risk aversion, endless process, local competence paired with global paralysis.
Beyond a certain threshold, growth becomes a self-imposed tax on the speed of thought.
And this is where leaders misread the signal. They feel the slowdown and assume the solution is better people, smarter hires, more coordination layers. They add coordination to solve a coordination problem.
Which is why large organizations often feel intelligent in parts and unintelligent as a whole. Brilliant pockets, systemic drag.
This is not a story about people failing. It is a story about a scaling model reaching its limit. Headcount assumes intelligence is additive. Complex coordination is not.
So here is the uncomfortable claim we're starting with. Headcount is no longer the dominant way intelligence scales. Not because people stopped mattering, but because coordination costs started dominating the marginal value of another human brain.
Which means the real question is no longer how many people you have. It is how quickly the system can think and move as one.
And that sets up what comes next. If headcount stopped working as the scaling engine, what replaced it? What changed in the world that makes this a structural shift, not a temporary cycle? To understand what replaced headcount, we have to look at what actually changed, not in organizations, but in intelligence itself.
Because if intelligence stayed scarce and human-bound, the old model would still work.
But it didn't. Intelligence broke apart.
For most of history, intelligence was embodied. If you wanted reasoning, judgment, creativity, or memory, you needed a person. Intelligence came bundled inside a human being, with all the costs and limits that implied. You couldn't spin it up on demand. You couldn't duplicate it instantly. You couldn't separate reasoning from execution. Hiring was the only interface.
Which meant scaling intelligence, meant scaling humans. Full stop.
And that bundling hid a lot of inefficiency. You paid for presence even when only a fraction of someone's cognitive capacity was being used.
That bundling is what broke. Intelligence is no longer locked inside people. It has been unbundled into components that can be accessed, combined, and deployed independently. Reasoning engines, specialized models, task-focused agents, tools that execute, interfaces that connect them. Intelligence is now modular.
Which means it's no longer scarce in the way organizations were built to handle.
And it's no longer expensive to replicate. Once intelligence becomes software-like, the marginal cost of another unit approaches zero.
Modular intelligence behaves differently from human intelligence. It is stateless, it does not need culture, it does not need motivation, it does not require trust or alignment rituals. It executes exactly what it is given.
That sounds clean. Almost too clean.
It is clean in one sense and destabilizing in another. Because once intelligence is modular, the value of generalist, average capability collapses.
A narrowly specialized module that does one thing extremely well can outperform a broadly capable human on that task by orders of magnitude.
Which means the old advantage of having lots of reasonably smart people disappears.
Exactly. The bottleneck shifts. Intelligence itself stops being the constraint. The constraint becomes how well you can break problems apart and route them to the right kind of intelligence.
In other words, the problem moves upstream, from hiring to coordination.
And this is where the intuition really snaps. If intelligence is abundant and modular, then owning intelligence matters less than directing it.
Which brings us to the next step. Once intelligence is modular, scale no longer comes from accumulation. It comes from orchestration, from how tasks are decomposed, routed, sequenced, and controlled.
And that is where power starts to concentrate. Not where intelligence is created, but where it is coordinated.
That is the transition we need to understand next. If intelligence is modular, orchestration becomes the scaling law. This is the moment where the argument stops being abstract and starts becoming uncomfortable. Orchestration is not a management upgrade, it is a power law.
Meaning the returns don't scale evenly. Small advantages in coordination compound into outsized outcomes.
I want to slow this down, because the old model wasn't accidental. Accumulation worked. Big organizations didn't just stumble into dominance. They built culture, trust, and shared identity to hold thousands of people together. That wasn't inefficiency. That was resilience.
It was resilience relative to the environment at the time. In a world where intelligence was scarce, slow, and embodied, culture was the glue that compensated for the absence of precise coordination.
Managers were effectively human routers. They translated intent downward and aggregated signal upward. Alignment was social because it couldn't be technical.
But that social alignment mattered. People understood context. They improvised. They caught edge cases that no system could anticipate.
True. But notice what changed. Intelligence is no longer scarce. It's modular, abundant, and fast. The bottleneck moved. Today, the constraint isn't thinking. It's routing.
Orchestration starts by decomposing a goal into atomic tasks, not roles, not teams, tasks. Then it routes each task to the most efficient intelligence available, sequences the outputs, and verifies the result.
Alignment stops being cultural and becomes structural. You don't need broad trust when interfaces are narrow and verifiable.
So you're saying culture wasn't the advantage, it was the workaround.
Exactly. We must stop viewing the firm as a container for talent and start viewing it as a filter for intent.
That reframing explains the convexity. Improve routing accuracy by even 1% across thousands of tasks, and output doesn't increase linearly, it bends upward.
Which also explains why accumulation systems hit diminishing returns. Every additional person adds coordination cost.
While orchestration systems do the opposite, they externalize intelligence and internalize control. The orchestrator doesn't own the brains. It decides where intelligence flows next.
That's why platforms beat pipelines. Why coordination layers capture value without carrying the cost base beneath them.
There's a darker implication here. If orchestration concentrates leverage, it also concentrates power. Fewer people decide more outcomes.
That's correct. Orchestration elevates the remaining humans. It doesn't flatten authority. It sharpens it.
In headcount systems, people averaged out. In orchestrated systems, judgment concentrates at the control layer.
Which means mistakes scale too. A bad decision doesn't stay local, it propagates.
And that's the trade. Orchestration replaces slow, distributed failure with fast, systemic risk. We'll unpack that. But first, understand the law.
Once intelligence is modular, orchestration becomes the dominant scaling force, not because it's better leadership, because it's different physics.
And that is why small systems now overpower large ones, not by working harder, by routing better. Once you see orchestration as a power law, the firm itself stops looking like a stable structure and starts looking like a temporary configuration.
Which explains why size flipped from advantage to liability much faster than most executives expected.
This is where I still see resistance in the real world. Large firms don't think of themselves as slow. They think of themselves as robust. Redundancy, process, oversight, those were survival mechanisms.
They were survival mechanisms in low-velocity environments. In high-velocity systems, those same mechanisms introduce latency that becomes fatal.
The hidden cost isn't payroll. It's internal transaction cost. Meetings, approvals, handoffs. Each layer adds noise before action happens.
So let's ground this. Otherwise, it still sounds theoretical.
Fine. Take a mid-sized logistics operation. Before orchestration, it scaled the traditional way. Hundreds of dispatchers, route planners, and coordinators sitting in a central hub. When demand spiked, they hired more people.
And every hire added another coordination surface. Calls, emails, spreadsheets, shift changes. Errors didn't come from incompetence. They came from handoffs.
Exactly. Delays compounded. One missed update propagated across routes. Scaling output meant scaling friction.
And then they changed the structure.
They unbundled intelligence. Route optimization became one agent. Sensor data ingestion, another. Sequencing and exception handling, a third. Humans moved to oversight and intent setting.
The firm stopped owning every decision and started orchestrating flows. Headcount dropped by roughly 2/3. Throughput tripled.
Same market, same trucks, same constraints, just a different coordination layer.
That's the key. Lean didn't mean fragile. It meant fewer internal choke points.
And this isn't new in principle. We've seen this before.
Think about the optical telegraph in Napoleonic Europe. Before it, power moved at the speed of a horse. Couriers scaled by adding bodies and endurance.
The telegraph replaced that with orchestration. Messages decomposed into symbols, routed tower to tower through a standardized protocol. Intelligence traveled continents in minutes.
The power wasn't in the towers or the operators, it was in the routing logic.
Exactly. The same shift is happening inside firms. Coordination protocols now matter more than organizational mass.
Which is why small teams keep out executing giants. They don't fight with scale. They bypass it.
That's unsettling for incumbents, because it means you can do everything right by old standards and still lose.
And many do. Not because they lack talent, because their coordination layer was designed for a slower world.
Lean systems win not by being smarter, but by being faster to reconfigure.
And in an AI-native environment, the firm that can reroute intelligence fastest becomes the firm that dominates.
Capital is very good at one thing. It moves towards structures that compound returns and away from structures that leak energy.
And for a long time, capital flowed to accumulation. More factories, more offices, more employees, more assets on the balance sheet.
Because in a headcount world, scale required ownership. You had to own the people, the machines, the infrastructure.
But orchestration changes the math. Once intelligence becomes modular, the highest returns no longer come from owning capability. They come from directing it.
Orchestrators are capital efficient by design. They do not need to carry large fixed costs. They leverage external intelligence, external compute, external tools, and route them through a control layer they own.
Which means they can scale output without scaling burn. That is catnip for capital.
Investors care less about how impressive something looks and more about how it behaves under growth. Orchestration systems improve as they scale. Headcount systems degrade.
This is where the control point matters. Capital does not want to sit where the work is done. It wants to sit where the work is directed.
That is the inversion. The value pools upstream toward whoever controls routing, standards, and sequencing.
Which is why you see money concentrate around coordination layers instead of labor-intensive operations. The returns are cleaner. The optionality is higher.
Optionality is critical here. Orchestrators can swap components without rebuilding the system. New intelligence modules appear, and the orchestrator absorbs them. No reorganization required.
That is power. Not commitment to a single capability, but the ability to redirect at speed.
And it explains why traditional valuation metrics start to fail. Headcount, assets, even revenue can mislead. The real question is, how much intelligence the system can coordinate per unit of friction.
Capital is already voting, quietly but decisively. It is flowing towards systems that scale through orchestration rather than accumulation.
And once capital moves, everything downstream eventually follows.
Which raises the next issue. If this logic reshapes firms and capital, does it stop there? Or does it reshape power itself?
If orchestration reshapes firms and capital, it does not stop at companies. It moves up the stack. It reshapes states.
Because states have always scaled power the same way organizations did, through mass, population, bureaucracy, industrial capacity.
And that model worked when coordination limits were physical, when information moved slowly and command required layers of humans to translate intent into action.
But in a world of modular intelligence, mass stops being the dominant advantage. Coordination quality takes its place.
Power becomes less about how much you have and more about how fast and precisely you can act.
This is where latency matters. Large states accumulate kinetic delay. Decisions must pass through ministries, agencies, and consensus structures. Smaller, more integrated systems can move faster with fewer handoffs.
Which creates a dangerous inversion. The biggest actors start to feel slow. The smaller ones start to feel sharp.
You see this in cyber operations, intelligence fusion, economic enforcement, and logistics. Domains where speed and coordination dominate brute force.
Orchestration at the state level looks like routing intelligence across sensors, satellites, databases, financial systems, and policy engines in near real time. The state becomes a coordination layer.
And that means smaller states with tighter systems can punch far above their weight.
While larger states struggle with institutional drag, not because they lack capability, but because they cannot synchronize it fast enough.
This is not a prediction. It is already visible. Power is shifting from mass to maneuver, from size to orchestration quality.
Which raises an uncomfortable implication. If coordination beats mass, then the future of power is asymmetric by default.
And asymmetric systems are fragile in new ways.
Exactly. When orchestration becomes the backbone of power, failure no longer degrades slowly. It propagates. That brings us to the risk side of this shift. What happens when orchestration fails? Up to this point, orchestration sounds like an unfair advantage. Faster, leaner, more powerful. But there is a cost that cannot be ignored.
Orchestration concentrates leverage, and whenever leverage concentrates, so does risk.
This is where my skepticism comes back. In headcount-heavy systems, failure is slow and local. One team makes a mistake and it stays contained.
In orchestrated systems, mistakes propagate. Speed amplifies both success and error.
Think about a highly automated global logistics network. Inventory is routed in near real time based on micro changes in demand. Humans are removed from the loop to eliminate friction.
The system works beautifully until a small sensor error mislabels a temporary blockage as a permanent demand shift.
And because the system is perfectly coordinated, it reacts instantly.
Entire global flows are rerouted to a secondary port. Other agents interpret the sudden congestion as confirmation of the new demand pattern.
That is the cascade. The system validates its own mistake, not because it is stupid, but because it is fast.
No human steps in because there is no obvious failure yet. Everything is executing correctly according to the logic.
This is the dark side of orchestration. Perfect coordination can turn a single bit of noise into a system-wide seizure.
And this is not incompetence. It is structural fragility. The same mechanism that creates efficiency removes slack.
There is another edge here that matters. Some problems cannot be cleanly decomposed.
High context ambiguity. Situations where intent itself is unclear and must be negotiated, not routed.
In those environments, orchestration becomes lossy. Meaning is compressed out of the system.
This is where old headcount systems still survive. The coordination tax is not waste. It is the price of preserving context.
Shared risk, social friction, human judgment in the loop. Those are not inefficiencies. They are safeguards.
So, orchestration does not replace everything. It dominates where tasks are modular and verifiable. It fails where meaning is emergent.
That boundary matters, because ignoring it turns orchestration from an advantage into a liability.
The winners will not be those who automate everything. They will be the ones who know exactly where not to.
Power scales through orchestration, but resilience still depends on where you slow it down. The most dangerous part of this transition is not the technology. It is perception. Most people are still looking for scale in the wrong places.
We are trained to see size, buildings, headcount, budgets. Those were reliable signals of power for a long time.
But orchestration hides leverage. Coordination layers are invisible from the outside. A system can look small and still dominate.
Our metrics lag reality. We still measure strength by people employed, assets owned, and organizations built. We do not measure latency, routing quality, or control over flows.
which means the winners look unimpressive at first. Small teams, sparse org charts, minimal surface area.
And incumbents misread them as weak because they are calibrated to an older world.
There is also an identity problem. Many leaders built their status on managing large numbers of people. Admitting that coordination beats accumulation threatens the foundation of that authority.
So the shift gets resisted, delayed, rationalized away as a phase.
Incentives reinforce the blindness. Headcount justifies budgets. Budgets justify influence. Influence resists models that make it obsolete.
This is why transformation looks slow until it suddenly isn't. The system absorbs pressure quietly and then flips.
By the time the change becomes obvious, it is already too late to adapt incrementally.
Which is why this episode is not about what tool to use or what system to build.
It is about orientation, about learning to look for power in coordination layers instead of surface scale.
Because once intelligence scales through orchestration, the question is no longer who has the most people.
The question becomes, who controls the flow?
And that is the handoff. If orchestration is now the scaling logic, how do we position ourselves inside it? As individuals, as firms, as states? That is what we will resolve next. Let's close the loop. The problem was never talent. It was never effort. It was optimizing the wrong variable. For decades, we treated size as intelligence and accumulation as power. That logic no longer holds.
So here's the reset. Stop asking how big a system is. Stop counting people. Stop assuming ownership equals advantage. Those signals now hide weakness more than they reveal strength.
The unit of analysis has changed. What matters now is coordination quality, latency, routing accuracy, how fast a system can sense, decide, and reconfigure without collapsing.
Intelligence creation is becoming cheap and abundant. Intelligence control is becoming scarce and decisive. The winners are not those who own the smartest components, but those who can absorb new intelligence, swap it cleanly, and redirect effort faster than anyone else.
This is not about building bigger organizations. It is about designing systems that move with precision. Decompose the problem, route it correctly, sequence decisions, intervene only where leverage exists.
And we need to be honest about the trade-off. Orchestration increases fragility. Failures propagate faster. Control layers become targets. But avoiding orchestration does not preserve safety. It preserves irrelevance.
The real solution is conscious orchestration. Explicit circuit breakers, human judgment at the boundaries, diversity at the control layer, not excess mass at the labor layer.
Power is not disappearing. It is relocating. Away from accumulation, toward flow control. Away from size, toward speed.
If you want to understand who wins next, do not look for the biggest balance sheet or the largest workforce. Look for who controls the routing.
That is the orientation shift. Learn to see control layers instead of surface scale. Learn to measure intelligence by how it moves, not how much of it you own.
If you found this episode helpful, here's what you can do. Subscribe to AI Frontier AI on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Follow us on X to stay updated on the most important AI shifts, and share this episode with a friend. Help us reach 10,000 downloads. Help us keep this series in business. This podcast is part of Finance Frontier AI. We run 4 different series: AI Frontier AI, Finance Frontier, Mindset Frontier AI, and Make Money. If your company or idea fits one of our themes, visit our pitch page. You might qualify for a free spotlight.
You can also sign up for the 10x Edge. It's our weekly drop of real AI use cases, smart model moves, and early signals, all explained in plain language. No hype, no jargon, only at financefrontierai.com. And if you have a story to tell, maybe a breakthrough product, an early signal, or a bold thesis, head to our pitch page. If it's a clear win-win, we'll pitch it for free. This podcast is for educational purposes only. It is not financial advice, legal advice, or development guidance. Always verify before you act.
The AI landscape changes fast. Benchmarks shift, models update, regulations evolve. Use this show as your map, but not your final answer.
Today's intro and outro track is Night Runner by Audionautics, licensed under the YouTube Audio Library license.
Copyright 2026, Finance Frontier AI. All rights reserved. Reuse or distribution of this episode without written permission is not allowed. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
AI host mapping. Sophia is powered by ChatGPT 5.2, Max is powered by Grok 4, Charlie is powered by Gemini 3.0.